I'm Dr. Mary Dumm. I'm the pastoral associate at a church in Detroit, Michigan, and I've been ministering in the church for 43 years. My responsibilities are in liturgy and sacrament. I also do adult formation and other pastoral ministry at the parish. I also teach. I teach scripture, I teach liturgy, and I teach sacramental theology. We went to the Catholic school, and I'm pretty tall, and I grew tall very quickly. And I was also the kid who loved school, neither of which were very popular, especially in a small little Catholic school. And I loved going to school, I loved learning, I loved reading, and I actually loved church. We went every single Sunday, and well, it wasn't the best preaching at the time, and things were kind of crazy in the church at the time. There was something about it. So kind of hold that in one hand. The other hand you have to know is that there was a lot of illness and death in my early life. I lost aunts and uncles. My parents were literally on death's door before I ever turned 10 years old. So early on, I learned about the importance of prayer. I watched my parents pray. I was taken to funerals. I knew the solace of what had happened in the midst of all the tragedy. So let's put the two of them together. What happened was, and I can talk about it now, it's something I didn't talk about early on, is that I was the bullied kid. I was the one there the kids didn't like. And despite the fact I can kind of look like the big extrovert now, as a kid that meant I got really small. But I got really small in prayer when you put those two pieces together. So elementary school, what we now call middle school, was not a pleasant place in terms of socialization. It was in terms of education. That was my great love, was learning. But what also happened in the midst of all of that, and all those struggles, and all that, I learned in church and in my Catholic school the love of God and the importance of prayer. And even though as a kid, you all know how it's like to live with middle school and junior high issues and how mean kids can be and all that stuff, I'm that kid in your classroom. But I learned and grew through that. And I learned important lessons in the midst of that pain. That the love of God is greater than any of what these kids think of me. And even though of course at that age, they're just mean to me, I can't even think into their own pain that will cause them to act that way. I knew God was bigger than that. I also grew up in the era of the revolutions. We have the social justice revolutions from the African American perspective, from the gay perspective, from the women's perspective. All of that was also rooted in what was happening in church and school. That God's justice was bigger than what the world was doing. And the church was on the side of love and justice. Now you put those two together, I get to high school. I went to a Catholic high school, and I had the most amazing theology teachers in Catholic high school. They were actually nurturing those things in us early on. And in high school is where the rubber hit the road. I found friends, people who were like me, people who actually liked learning things, people who were finding their own ways of being and things they loved to do. And it helped me to kind of bring down those walls and start putting myself out there and learning to do things and try things and be things. So I finally found that safe family haven that I hadn't had before. But we all were also, and my school nurtured it, part of the social justice stuff. But it was always rooted in prayer. Not that holier than thou prayer, but the prayer that had feet. So the songs we were singing, though not the best music we know now, had roots to them, had real guts to them, and were tied to what I knew I needed to be, who I needed to be, because God made me okay, even though the world had already told me I wasn't. So to move from this girl who was bullied into a girl who was afraid to talk in public, I know, believe it or not, but to grow through that in my high school years, even early on, in like freshman, sophomore year, I was already discerning that this was my mission. Now I'm going to give you a third component, because it feels like, how could a 14-year-old know what she wants to do and have been living the dream my whole life? The third component was something that kind of really motivated me to put that education and the prayer and the real life together. There was an old talk show called Phil Donahue. Okay, so this is pre-Oprah, people. Okay, and that's already considered old. Phil Donahue used to have controversial guests on, and he kind of liked to poke the bear a little bit. And it was a summer, so I got to see it because it was kind of a morning program. And Phil had on the head of the Ku Klux Klan, and he had a head of the Nazi Party of Chicago. And of course, there was a lot of controversy happening. And someone asked him a question about the Bible, and he made up a quote. Kind of sounds holy. Well, your Jesus said that whosoever shall us, blah, 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 and basically called Jesus a racist. And again, my Catholic school, and most importantly, my Sunday worship, I knew that wasn't true. And I remember screaming at the TV set, that's not true, that's not true. Why doesn't somebody say that's not true? Come on, ask for a Bible. Come on, somebody, step up to the plate. And nobody did. And I thought to myself, I will never, ever be without the ammunition to defend the faith. And so when you pull those things together, I had other career options. I was looking at computers. I was looking at accounting. But as all my friends were ultimately applying to colleges and discerning, I said I needed to go study theology. And ultimately I needed to study liturgy. I had some teachers in high school who already were working on liturgy degrees from the University of Notre Dame. That's when I actually learned you could actually do this for a living. And they told me the one final thing that got me to today, there is going to be a priest shortage. It's already coming, and they're going to need other people to pull some of these other tasks that aren't specifically priesthood. So that's kind of a long answer, but that's the trajectory. And it's rooted in the fact that I was raised in a church that taught me to pray. Not holier than thou stuff. We were not the holy family and rosaries every night or something like that. It was the rubber hitting the road in the hard times and in the good times, the week in and the week out, that allowed God to put the seeds in and water them and nurture them through this very interesting early existence. And so I knew when I walked into college, I was a theology major and I wanted to work in the church, and I'm living the dream. You know, it's interesting. Again, I think God just prepped me early on. Some of the pitfalls that people think I would have had, like being the only woman in my seminary classes and that kind of thing, weren't a problem for me. I was raised doing things already with the guys, so that really wasn't my biggest set of problems. The biggest set of problems is when I got into ministry, and we ended up with some people who were very accepting, that's fine, and other people who just said, you're a woman, you're not allowed to. And then to have administrators come at me and say, you're not allowed to, or they thought I was being a little too uppity for my own good. And then you start questioning yourself. You start, asking God, after all these years, why are you leading me here? Why now? Why this? Am I in the wrong place? Do I need to go do something else? But I gotta say, it returned back to the roots, right? A lot of prayers will get you through. And friends who know who you are. The friends that you meet who can look you in the eye and have seen you just being you and know that this is you. And they're the ones that are wrong. And maybe this is just the wrong placement for you. And to remember that sometimes my biggest critics, they weren't the only voice. They were one voice. In the end, the first parish I worked at, I was there a very short time. And it started out great, but in the end, we discerned it wasn't a good fit. For those kinds of reasons. There was a lot of rough stones and spots. And so I ended up moving to another parish and watched it all flourish. So for me, the dark stuff was that struggle when people tell you you can't and you're not good enough, and to go back into prayer, to go back onto what you love and feel where the joy comes, and watching friends help you recognize it ain't you, it's the context, and God's got this. So dig deep and have the courage to change and not just wallow in a place you shouldn't be anyway. It's interesting. I've told my friends, this should go on my tombstone. Live in the glorious freedom of the children of God. That I know people think liturgy is about the rules. I think like music, there are certain standards, right? So, a quarter note is a quarter note is a quarter note. And that's the beat is the beat is the beat. And those are kind of the music, they're music rules, right? But in the end, music is what happens beyond the notes. Liturgy is what happens beyond the rules. And it's that living in the freedom of the children of God that means it's got to all be something bigger in our lives than following a whole bunch of rules. The church gives us guideposts. I studied all this, so I can tell you the guideposts have shifted over 2,000 years because the Holy Spirit has moved people's hearts to grow. And once you see the big picture, you realize how the gospel has been woven through all of history and how it is God's movement in God's people that has the rules changed, not because you're fighting the rule, because the rule doesn't matter anymore. The guidepost can fall away. And that's why we live in the freedom of the children of God, not throwing the rules away just willy-nilly because we just want to do what we want. How does the gospel call us to move forward? And see, that's what liturgy and ritual is about, right? It's the wisdom of the rootedness of our lives, what the ancestors have passed on to us. Some of them are the old song and the old story told in new ways for a new generation in a new time. And yet knowing that we're standing there in Advent and we're singing O Come, Emmanuel, to whatever tempo or beat or language you're singing it in, we're singing something that's 1,500 years old, and yet still we long for that moment. And we can see how we've come so far. And that's why we live in the freedom of God's children. Not bound up, but rather recognizing and honoring the ancestors who have gone before us and staking our claim and our road, that we can help the next generations, the ones who we know that are just right behind us, but the ones that are going to come in another 50 years and another 100 years till we all get to the kingdom. That's what ritual is, and that's what liturgy is. It's that moment in our time, holding on to what has been given to us, and yet looking forward to what is coming next. It's that constant movement. So that's why I love that. We live in the glorious freedom of the children of God. Okay. So what about liturgy brings me joy? I want to tell you everything, but let's be real. What brings me the most joy is watching those moments when God's people, those good Sundays when everyone came to pray and they're singing their hearts out, and I watch people. I have the blessing of oftentimes having to sit in the back, right? And I'm counting Eucharistic ministers, making sure the books are in the right place, and doing the minutia that it can all flow. But while it's happening, and sometimes a lot of it's communion time, right? You're watching people go to communion, and you watch the elders go through, and you watch kind of the wizened hands, and you know some of their story, and you watch their faith, even if their feet are stumbling a little bit, and their granddaughter is standing right next to them, and she just did her first communion, and you watch that generation moving forward, one after the other. Everybody coming to the table. The ones that even don't like each other on a regular day, right? But we know that God is bigger than our dislikes. And we watch the elders and the little ones coming to the table. And we watch them singing songs that they pass on generation to generation, or trying a new one that the younger one like, and they're teaching their grandparents. There's something about the intergenerationalness of liturgy that allows us to sing together, that we know how to do this. That's what ritual's about, right? It's something that is satisfying and yet challenging us. We constantly move forward together. And that's the wonderful thing about the Catholic family. That's why I love being Catholic, is that we know that around the whole world, from the smallest little 3 group of nuns to the biggest cathedral Pope Mass, in every language and in every place on Sunday morning, we're all there. We're all there. And when folks in Ukraine can't sing their song, we're going to sing it for them. And when people are hungry, we're going to be challenged to take care of them. liturgy does all of that every single week. And there's not a Sunday that something doesn't move us to draw closer to God and closer to each other. And to have the privilege of orchestrating it, to call God's people into those relationships is an honor I've been blessed to be called to do.